Hello, today we are going to cover the topic solving rational inequalities. Let's consider an example. Solve the rational inequality x minus 6 over x squared plus 3x minus 108 less than or equal to 0. Express each solution using the interval notation. So the very first step is to find the boundary points. So to find the boundary points, we need to set the numerator and denominator equal to 0. So the numerator of this rational inequality is x minus 6. Set that to 0. So you can see the value of x equals 6. Then we need to set the denominator equal to 0. So the denominator is x squared plus 3x minus 108. That is equal to 0. So the factors, we need to factorize this trinomial. So we need to find two numbers whose product is negative 108 and the sum is 3. So the numbers are 12 and negative 9. So the factors of this trinomial are x plus 12 and x minus 9. So set those factors to 0. So by using the 0 product rule, each factor to 0. So x plus 12 equals 0. From that, we'll get the value of x equals negative 12. Set x minus 9 equals 0. So the value of x from this factor is x equals 9. So the boundary points are 6, negative 12, and 9. And before setting up the intervals, I would like to mention one important point. So you can see that this inequality contains an equal sign. So in the case of a rational inequality, use an open circle. Or when we write in terms of the interval notation, we usually use parentheses to represent all boundary points by setting the denominator equal to 0. So you always need to use parentheses for all boundary points in the denominator. That means the boundary points in the denominator are not included in the solution set. If you use bracket, then that means these points are included. Then when you set values of x as these boundary points, then that points makes this denominator is 0. That means the whole expression is undefined. So we cannot have these boundary points in the solution set. So if the inequality contains an equal sign, always use parentheses for boundary points in the denominator. Okay. And in this case, you can use bracket for the boundary point in the numerator. Okay. And if the inequality contains only an inequality sign like less than or greater than, you can always use parentheses for all the boundary points in the numerator and the denominator. Hope you got this point. So here the boundary points are 6, negative 12, and 9. So for convenience, we can plot these points on this number line. You can see that these 3 boundary points divide this number line into 4 intervals. So let's look at the intervals. So the intervals, first one is negative infinity to negative 12. And you can see that this negative 12 is a boundary point in the denominator. So use parentheses. Then the next interval is negative 12 to 6. We know that we need to use parentheses for negative 12 because it is a boundary point in the denominator. And 6 is a boundary point in the numerator. So you can use bracket. Then the third interval is 6 to 9. Use bracket for 6 because it is a boundary point in the numerator and 9 is a boundary point in the denominator. So you can use a parenthesis for that boundary point. Then the last interval or the fourth interval is 9 to infinity. So it is parenthesis 9 to infinity. And you know that for infinity and negative infinity, we always use parenthesis. And then the next step is to choose a test point from each of these intervals. So you can choose any point in between the endpoints of the interval. So for convenience, I am going to choose negative 14 from this interval because negative infinity to negative 12. So negative 14 is a point in between these. So when you substitute this point in the original inequality, so I always consider the factored form to substitute these values. That will be more easier to find out whether it will give you a negative or a positive value. So our first test value is negative 14. So negative 14 minus 6. So you can see that the numerator is negative. And when you substitute that negative 14 in this factored form of the denominator, so negative 14 plus 12, so it's a negative value. Negative 14 minus 9, that is also a negative value. So this product makes a positive value. So numerator is negative value divided by a positive value, that will give you a negative value. So on this interval, the value of this or the sign of this x minus 6 over x squared plus 3x minus 108 is negative. That means, so original inequality is less than or equal to 0. So we got a negative value for this. That means that interval satisfies this inequality. Okay. And then let's choose another point from this interval, negative 12 to 6. So again, for convenience, we can use 0. That will, when you substitute x as 0 in the original inequality, you will get a positive value. So that means it doesn't satisfy this inequality because this expression is less than or equal to 0. Okay, so it doesn't satisfy. Then the third interval, bracket 6 to 9 with a parenthesis. So we can choose, let's choose 7 as the test point. Then this value also makes this expression negative. That means it satisfies the inequality. Okay. Then from the last interval, we can choose 10 and substitute this value in the expression. So that also will give you a positive value. That means it doesn't satisfy the inequality because our inequality is less than or equal to 0. So the only intervals that will satisfy the inequality are negative infinity to negative 12 and 6 to 9. So our final answer is negative infinity to negative 12 with a parenthesis union, then bracket 6 to 9, 9 with a parenthesis. And remember, if the inequality, the rational inequality contains an equal sign, then always use parenthesis for all the boundary points in the denominator because they are not included in the solution set. Hope you got this concept.